Colton Classic fans, this is Mandy, regular panelist, along with Nate, and he has asked me to pick one of my favorite pairings that we have ever done on the show. So probably not a big surprise I'm picking something that has to do with chocolate and inappropriate body humor. So Moist Fury. We get a lot of roller skates. We get a chick fights on roller skates. And Trobolone, Bologna Gabolone chocolates, as well as dystopian futures and just general ridiculousness. We had paired this one originally with Warriors, which was one of my favorite films before we started the podcast and still is. It's just such a fun romp through a genre film with a lot of different costumes and a lot of different character acting, and just a really fun classic to watch if you've never seen it before. So anyway, here's my pairing recommendation and one of my favorite episodes ever. Moist Fury and Warriors, come out and play.
Welcome to Colton Classic.
Welcome, friends and fiends, to another episode of Colton Classic Podcast, the podcast where we review two thematically linked movies, one mainstream and one cult, and discuss them both. I'm super excited. I am also your host, comedian and film critic Nate Wyckoff. We've been plagued with technical troubles over here at Colton Classic Podcast this morning, so everyone is ripping and raring to go because I've made them wait a long time. I'm very excited. This is our Street Gangs episode. So we have 1979's The Warriors, and then we have Moist Fury from 2011. And I'm really excited to discuss each of these because they are very, very different, even though they have some thematic relation. That's my line, and I'm sticking to it. So we've got a great cast lined up on the panel today. We have a full house. We have Greg Johnson. How are you doing, Greg?
Well, I'm happy to be here to talk about the Warriors, but go fuck yourself for Moist Fury. So, I mean, a little bit of both.
It's pretty on brand. It's pretty on brand. That cackle you hear in the background is Jeffrey Tucker. How are you doing, Jeff?
Nathan, come out to play.
Clank, 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 clank. We also have Tad Mastroianni. Hello, Tad.
Nathan, why do you do this to me?
I specifically didn't tell anyone who made Moist Fury in case they had already seen previous films. I'm a fan. I'm just going to say that right now. We're going to talk about this. And rounding out the cast is our token female, who I'm very grateful to have, Amanda Longley. How are you doing, Mandy?
I'm good. And I also one of the very few females who does not have an aversion to the word moist.
It's not strongly liked amongst the male community, I think, either. It's just a rough thing. I don't
It's
eat
a fucking
chicken.
word, you weirdos.
I don't eat chicken as much as I could because moist is a terrible descriptor. All right. So let's talk about this movie, The Warriors from 1979. It's based on a novel called The Warriors by Sol Yurick, and it's directed by Walter Hill. Walter Hill did the screenplay with David Shaber. Walter Hill is a pretty great American writer, film director. Dave Shaber has done some stuff as well. Probably, I think the next most well-known film is maybe Flight of the Intruder from 1991, but he's done a lot of movies. Walter Hill directed one of my all-time favorite individuals, Nick Nolte, in the 48 Hours series. He also produced the Aliens films, so he's got a lot of street cred under his belt. But The Warriors is the film that follows a group of Coney Island street gang members in sort of a near 70s future. Like, it's a near future, but it's a near future as seen through the eyes of the 70s. This gang is trying to make it through a bunch of rival gangs' turfs when various sections of the subway are closed to them after they've been accused of murdering Caesar, the gang lord who is trying to unify all of the street gangs to sort of take control of the city from the police. So we open with this big park scene with thousands of gang members from different groups. Caesar's making this big stirring speech, unifying them all. Everyone seems to be behind him, and then this small gang right up at front. Somebody pulls a gun and shoots him. Now, seems like most people don't see who this is, except for one of the warriors. Well, the shooter then shouts out that the warriors guy shot Caesar. And so it starts this big chase, essentially. And the warriors, they split up, they reconvene, they go through all these trials to try and get through these other territories to get back to Coney Island. Um, Spoiler alert, it's not a spoiler alert, this is a movie from 1979. If you haven't seen this movie, personally, I highly suggest it. Even if you don't like it, and I think most people will, but even if you don't, it's kind of a cinema classic at this point. And there's so many references made in other movies and media, as we did in our intro. Warriors come out and play while they're banging glass bottles that are stuck on their fingertips like olives. Like, that's a classic line, a classic scene, and you'll just see so many references to this in pop culture. We watched the director's cut, except for Mandy, who watched the original cut. Anyone who's interested, the director's cut has very few changes. It's 76 seconds longer. This is, in my take, essentially what Walter Hill did. And it's interesting because Walter Hill did this little intro to the director's cut, where he says, like, I don't like director's cuts or special editions. I think they're stupid and you should just judge the movie on its own merit. Yet he acquiesced to do this one, which is funny because I don't really think that it's particularly different. The biggest difference people will notice is that it uses comic pane cuts. So while the original does have like a comic vibe with some of the transitions and some of these screenshots where they'll have an illustration for a transition that becomes a person's, actual actor, and then they'll go on with the scene, as sort of a way to go between these different events that are happening. The director's cut adds literally a bordered white line on the swipes. So instead of like a Star Wars barn swipe, it's actually got like a comic panel wipe. So I can see how that maybe he feels, if that was his original intent, is closer to his vision. The other things that he did is he cut out a few seconds here and there from some scenes and transitions and camera zooms, and he changed some zooms where they zoomed into new things, or when they didn't zoom at all, when they zoomed in the originals. They're very minor changes. Obviously, the director's cut is much, much crisper than the theatrical cuts that have been released. The panel artworks have been updated fully. It's actually, the new transitions and stuff are, to me, were actually a little, they weren't homogeneous with the product as a whole, because they're so crisp and so high def, high res, that it actually was a little different than the footage. Although the footage is very, very, very beautiful on this transfer, which I don't know if it was from a 4K or not, but it's quite beautiful. Regardless, I think the film itself doesn't change any plot points. It's pretty much the same exact film. Now, if you watch this movie, you will be, oh, this is the Odyssey. The Odyssey, of course, the famous Greek, it's an epic. It's an epic poem. Follows Odysseus as he tries to make it back, sailing around with his crew to his wife. Along the way, he sleeps with a bunch of different people, runs with a bunch of different mythical creatures, and so forth. Old hat. We've been there. We've done that. Go watch the Ray Harryhausen stop motion features if you want to get that vibe. But knowing that is cool watching The Warriors, because it's not a perfect parallel, but it is very clearly inspired by it. Now, I'm going to stop babbling here and get to what each person thinks. Greg, I'm going to start with you. Had you seen this before? And regardless, what was your takeaway watching it this time?
Yeah, I had seen it before. I had forgotten some of the, let's say, culturally and time sensitive moments of the film, such as using derogatory terms to describe how people are acting. But I remembered the film being a lot more lowbrow on my first viewing, and I liked it a lot more this time. I thought it was very smart. We could call this film Michael Bloomberg's New York, or at least his sense of what he thinks New York was. But yeah, I feel like this film really captures kind of a style really well. How everyone talks, even though they say some stuff that might be not so good today. It fits to the characters, which I found myself kind of shocked in thinking. A moment that stood out to me is when the lead character and the lead male and female really are on a bus together, and they see some like preppy prom people sitting there across from them, and they're sitting there all fucked up from fighting all night long. And the woman, she goes to kind of brush her hair back, almost like she's nervous or she's ashamed of how she looks. And all night the two leads have been kind of jousting with each other verbally, and he kind of stops her from fixing her hair, kind of like, no, like, let's sit in the moment, like, you're fine as you are, is how I took it anyway. And I forgot moments like that, and I just kind of remembered the overall idea of a bunch of kind of novelty street gangs screaming, at each other for an hour and a half and doing the as you said, Odyssey all the way back home.
Yeah, that's I like how you call them novelty street gangs, because they really are. And lots music, man, lots of bands, especially rockabilly and punk rock bands, have gotten their names from these street gangs. Of course, you have the Turbo ACs, and then you have the Baseball Furies, who are on Gearbox Records, I think, for a while. It just definitely influential. I think that the bus scene, or the train scene rather, that you mentioned, is by far my favorite scene in this movie, because it's like the only time when the outside world, what most people who are in a theater watching a movie, have that luxury, would be seeing as the real world. These two couples on prom dates, it looks like, enter the subway. They're stepping into the microcosm of this world of the street gangs, right? Like, the street gangs are fighting for their very survival, essentially. And in walks these two boys and two girls who are laughing and giggling in this ridiculous prom get-ups, and they sit down, and then they slowly realize who they're sitting near. And yeah, Mercy's the female lead in the Warriors, played by Deborah Van Valkenburg. She has this moment where she starts to sort of preen herself, right? Like, she's trying to look presentable, and Swan, the lead, is played by Michael Beck, pulls her hand down, like, not harshly, but no, like, there. And it's just this sense, and then it's just these long shots of, like, the prom guest faces, like, completely just turning, nooch, nothing.
I would just like to point out that they were probably disco dancers at this period of time, not prom goers. Just
I don't know.
for
They both have
authenticity.
matching suits with the
There's
ruffles.
it was definitely disco.
It did have a little Saturday Night Fever vibe going
Definitely
on.
disco.
Then it might be disco prom.
Disco
Would be the way to go. Yeah,
Okay.
so
Best of
it's
both
very out there. I want to say too, as we get into that, I'm talking about disco and in this era, where you had sort of this explosion of ethnic diversity and this takeover, or not a takeover, but this perceived takeover by the white status quo, that people of color and gay people were taking over music, which was the disco movement, and eventually the destroy disco, burn disco movement, whatever. Watch RuPaul's Drag Race this season; they touched on it. But this sort of microcosm is actually incredibly diverse. Walter Hill's film has a huge number of people of color. And while it doesn't explicitly have any gay characters, and as Greg said, they use the F word to refer to feminine behavior, and just sort of a taunt, which of course is unacceptable in I was going to say polite society, but really any society. If you're not gay, don't say that word. But it's weird though too, because they're characters that, from a sort of analytical, critical thinking, literature background, you look and you're like, oh, is this character perhaps gay? And a lot of times I think us film critics kind of go overboard by trying to speculate, but that's part of the fun of a medium like film and movies and stuff. But Ajax is a really great character in this, played by James Remar, who was in I think most recently in Black Lightning. He had a recurring role as Peter Gamby, if anybody's interested in that DC side project. But he plays Ajax, who's the tough guy of the Warriors, who keeps kind of vying for control. whatnot. And he's the one that calls people this word all the time. And he also makes many references to well, let's just say it, butt stuff. Every time he's in a fight, he's like, I'm gonna shove that up your ass. Like literally, it's all the time, to the point where I'm like, this is an extreme example of like a deeply closeted, person lashing out. And I thought it was interesting. It's not the main focus of the story, but I think it's very clear that they're working on that in there. And Rembrandt, who's the very pretty, he's like perfect skin and this really nice afro in the Warriors. When a group of them like are waiting for their leader to reconvene so they can go home on the train at Union Station, they get sort of sidetracked by a group of women who lead them to their hangout and are drinking, and he's uncomfortable, visibly uncomfortable. And we don't know if it's because of his age, because he is younger, or because of the fact that maybe he's gay or some version of this and is not comfortable with it. It's just those little things are throughout this movie, and it's not the main focus, so it was not pursued that way. But I think it makes it more interesting to the character dynamics are much more interesting because these elements are there, and I think you can make a strong argument that they exist. Let's jump ahead to Jeff. Jeff, had you seen The Warriors? And regardless, what was your take this time around?
I have seen The Warriors, but I honestly hadn't really remembered any of it. It felt pretty fresh. Obviously, except for a couple like lines that are kind of iconic. That like the "come out and play" line, like just gets in your head. Like if you've seen this movie, that's like soundbite is somewhere rattling around in your head, because it's like a key that's unlocked something in your brain, like a perfect piece of music or something. But yeah, I really liked it, and I'm surprised I didn't remember much about it. Like I honestly didn't remember almost anything except for the very, very broad strokes. But like even just that opening scene where Cyrus is like speaking to like this massive crowd, like that scene is amazing. Like there's so many extras in this scene. It really brings you right into the film, like right off the bat. I don't know how many people were in that scene, but it was thousands, and it didn't feel like it just felt really real. And I like that. It kind of transports you to like this, essentially is a fantasy world you describe as like a futuristic version of a place that came from an imagination. And you get right into it, and it's very it's very interesting. And then you go along on this, which is essentially an adventure story, which they always work. Adventure stories are just good entertainment. The thing that I thought was interesting about this movie, though, is these characters, like especially the James Remar character, is very unlikable, especially in today's situation. And I think the only reason you care that these warriors get out at all is either a sense of like strong justice that they've been framed for something they didn't do, or that the villain of the story is just so unlikable. And I think it's a combination of those things that make this film still work. Because he is profoundly unlikable. Like, I actually don't even know who this actor is, but like, I really like all the choices that he did. He's just like,
Are you talking about the villain who shot Caesar?
Yeah.
His name is David Patrick Kelly. This was his first theatrical role. He's been in many things. I remember him most, not for this. I actually remember him as T-Bird, the murdering rapist of the gang in one of them in The Crow with Brandon Lee. And he does make some great choices. And it's interesting because he actually isn't given much to work with script wise. And so the fact that he makes these strong choices, there's this scene where he keeps calling to check in with other people about have they got the warriors yet. And of course he has a vested interest, right? Because he's the real shooter. And his gang is the rogues, and they sort of have this like leather bar motif with these leather hats and stuff. And this really cool old, I don't know if it's an Edsel or what it is, car that's sort of graffitied up. He does the come out and play line. But he really just makes his own material. When he's making a call and his friend is getting some snacks or whatever from this young girl working at a newsstand, and he starts eating the chocolate and he's like, let's go, and she's like, you have to pay for that, and he like chucks the bar across the counter and is like, pay for what? And that's like that's his entire scene, but it gives you what you need to know. This guy is volatile, intentionally so. Like, he seems completely bent on it. It's interesting too because it would be very easy to go a sort of racial direction with the Warriors. Yet Walter Hill seemed to subvert some cases of easy, black versus white violence, that sort of thing, and it placed it elsewhere, which I think was really cool because I think it worked more. For example, the Turbo ACs, they're the skinhead gang. And they're the first one that the Warriors run afoul of and escape fairly easily. But they're in a vehicle, a big bus, and they're all hanging off the sides. And many of the white members of this gang, or at least white appearing characters, are in traditional neo-Nazi skinhead garb. They have Doc Martens and or similar boots and suspenders, white shirts, skinhead. And yet there are probably 50% people of color in this gang as well. So it changed. It's like, I no longer know what a skinhead means in this context, except they just all have shaved heads. But they don't remove the racial implication across the board, because at the end, spoiler alert, when the Warriors get to Coney Island and they're on the beach and they're facing off against the rogues who've met them there to sort of end things, because that's their safest bet, is to kill them, right? And hide their secret. The rogues are all white, and the gang that has been sort of seemingly the most influential to organize the other gangs, the Riffs, are all black. And when they show up in a great mass to we presume, kill the rogues, who they have discovered were the true killers, right? It's a very clear picture. The rogues are white, and there's a sea of black faces around them. And so I think you can really read a lot into that, because David Patrick Kelly's character, when he asks, why did you do it? His answer, he's laughing. He's giving this like Joker performance, and he's laughing, I do stuff like that. And if he goes by Luther, and his character's name is Luther, I just do stuff like that. And yet it doesn't ring true, right? At least not to me watching the film, because in the opening scene, you have Caesar, who is a person of color, giving this like rousing speech to this sea of faces of different races. And it's one of those things where the group of all white people shoots this person of color. I mean, this is 1978, 1979. It is not beyond the civil rights movement, right? So especially people are still thinking about Martin Luther King in some ways. And I think that the visuals very much speak to that. And so in the end, they never say it outright. But I think that, again, this is one of those movies where there's a lot of subtext and there's a lot of visual cues, and you can make strong arguments that this is a racial play at this moment. Why, you might ask, is it not made very obvious? One, Greg, I think you got to this. Seeing it as a kid, it seems kind of lowbrow because it's just a bunch of goofy gangs. Like, it's fun, but it's a bunch of goofy gangs with gimmicks, like the Baseball Furies, who paint their faces like baseball fans wear, the ridiculous 70s baseball outfits and run around with bats. And then you have, and so that's what it feels like. But then as an adult, I watch, I'm like, oh, this actually is quite a subtle film in many ways. There's this ridiculous stuff happening, but it's more played like The Outsiders than, I'm trying to think of it, than Shoot 'em Up. You know what I mean? Let's move on to you, Tad, because I've been talking a lot. Tad, had you seen The Warriors, and what was your take this go around?
I had seen it, but it had been so long that a lot of it kind of drifted out of my head, similar to the experience Jeff had. There were a few scenes that stuck in my head that I still remembered. The ending, the fight in the bathroom, which is one of my favorite scenes. That scene in the subway where Swan and Mercy kind of break break their barriers down a little bit and kind of connect for a second, and he's like, "Duh, get out of my face, woman." But on this rewatch, it's a mixed bag for me. I do enjoy the movie a lot, but I also see that a lot of the acting is flat, and I'm never sure if it's on purpose or not. But a lot of the characters are very deadpan, very like they speak very monotone. It's like walk up and like, "Hey, we gotta go." It's not. I never really know.
Now you're
but
doing a Moist Fury in person. You're jumping the gun.
I
to
know,
our
I
next
know,
film.
I know. But it's funny you mentioned that because I was sitting there and going, what is director's cut about this besides the transitions? And then I realized it's pretty much only the transitions, and I was like, so this is essentially the Warriors Special Edition, where and by the way, I make that joke because the transfer of this movie is pristine. It is gorgeous.
Beautiful.
It reminds me of how gorgeous. You go back and watch any of the original Star Wars movies, and they're like after they went back and cleaned them up, they look amazing. This movie is very similar, and it also has that same feel of, did they really need to stuff in these little extra transitions? Not sure. But Nate, do you know, did this come before or after Ang Lee's interesting Hulk take from 2003, where they did similar comic book transitions?
I imagine this release was after.
No. So Ang Lee definitely was the trendsetter there.
But I don't know. I mean, it could have been either. It could have, but yes, of course, Ang Lee's the Hulk has those very, very similar comic panel transitions. And we're definitely going to do an episode on that because we're going to have differing opinions, because I think it's a masterwork.
I hate it.
And yeah, Mandy and others disagree with me. Again, Nick Nolte, I don't know how you could even argue with me. But okay, so I think this is an interesting point, and I think it makes, because the changes are so subtle. One thing I do like is he did cut down on a lot of the overlong transition moments from the director's cut, but then he added them in other places. So I don't really know. It almost felt like a contractual fuck you in some ways. Like, if you can read between the lines, it's like, well, I guess I wish this could have been different. Like, he probably got out his copy at home, one of the copies that whatever sent him a million years ago, and was like, I'll watch it again and be like, yeah, I mean, I guess I hate these cuts. I hate these wipes. I hate the way it's got that blending on the edges. And he's like, well, I guess we could throw that in there. And there is a different opening, which is Walter Hill reading this little bit, basically comparing. It's a little on the nose for me. It's comparing I believe Greek. Is it Greek or Roman?
It is Greek.
Okay,
it's Greek. It's what the Xenophones and Abias. I'm saying that wrong, but yeah,
nailed it.
Nailed it.
Yeah, he reads that, and I mean, it's very short. It's like 15 seconds or something, I would hazard. And then it goes to the story, and it doesn't detract. And I think that at the time, it probably would have made it more obvious to viewers that this was sort of a journey film in that way, like an odyssey for an epic for the contemporary time at the time. So I see him adding that in. I could do without it, to be honest. I like the 70s aesthetic of the actual cinematography. I never really cared that much for the comic transitions at all in the Warriors, the original version as well, the vibe. Now, does it detract? I don't think so. Is it necessary? No. Do I feel like maybe he was asked and given a lot of money and he's like, how can I change this without changing it at all? And hey, I'll take that. I will take that. It's the most beautiful that the Warriors has ever looked, and probably will ever look until we get some sort of spooky 3D stereo optic VR copy, which is going to be weird. Yeah. All right, Mandy, your take. Have you seen the Warriors? And regardless, how'd you take it this time?
I had seen it. My memory was pretty true for rewatching it. There was definitely some stuff that I had kind of forgotten. Like some of it more like the framing at the beginning. I kind of forgot like why they got in the situation to begin with. Even though it's pretty critical to the whole movie, but like kind of more the journey, like the hopping in and out of the subway, like over the turnstiles. the Molotov cocktails, the Lizzies, definitely not the Lezzies, the Lizzies.
The Lizzies.
Girl
I'm really
gang.
shocked they didn't make that joke in there somewhere.
Yeah, I kind of forgotten that there was that girl character that sort of like tags along with them, sort of like adopts herself into their gang and decides if she's gonna move to Coney Island. But like she is a really cool character to like see again. And yeah, so like I was just like, oh, this is cool. I'm glad we're watching this again. Basically remember it. But most of like kind of what sort of like what I think now is it like actually took the time this time around to like do a little more reading and research on the source material. And as you just mentioned, like as a journey film, you could say that it's based on like a lot of classic journey films, but it's mainly based on that Greek story that we just mentioned that I totally butchered the name, where a Greek army is hired by a Persian emperor to go and like help him take over the throne. And then his name is Sirius, just like the guy that called them all to the park. He gets killed. They end up with no patron and they're stuck behind enemy lines and they have to like get out of town. So this follows that. And then it was like the inspiration for the novel that you mentioned and then made into a movie. I also was like, oh, like because diversity and equity is like a hugely on people's minds now, especially like when looking at media and looking at aged sources of media. And I was like, oh, like this is a very diverse cast for like this period of time, like go them. And then I like read more about it and I was like, oh, like it was supposed to be an all black cast. It was supposed to be all people of color based on the novel. And the producers really wanted to whitewash it and have an all white cast. And then this director, like they fought to have as many people of color as they ended up having, but it still is like sort of felt like a loss, considering that the source material is really supposed to speak more strongly to this fight against the man and this fight against prosecution and racism. And it kind of it definitely got watered down in the treatment of the film. But I was really glad to see it again and to see that they did end up with the product that they had, and the quantity of people of color acting in this that they did. So
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because as we move into the 80s, it's sort of the start of the whitening of cinema again. Because, of course, in the early days, we had very much, I mean, American cinema into the 40s and 50s is exclusively the domain of faux high society white people. And then you get into the 60s when things started to go a little different and a backlash. And of course, the availability of money for movies and drive-in production hit in the 70s. And then in the 80s, you get the video store boom and the VHS hit. So the 80s gave way to the 90s. And then in the 90s, you get a very token representation, right? Like I love Saved by the Bell, but let's look at Saved by the Bell. You have Mario Lopez, who is, yes, he's a Latinx, but he's also beautiful. So that was like a big boat, right? Like, okay, well, you can be in this, but you have to be beautiful. And then we had Lark, who is black, and she's also very pretty, and but she's then just the token, and she's always the side character. She's a great character and she does a great job, but she's the side character, and that's what we sort of are relegated to. And then when you get into the 2000s, it is again this exclusive white club, and it's quite stark. And now, of course, we see pushback against it. And hey, we're going to be doing a whitewashing episode at some point in the near future, so keep a lookout for that, because there are some shocking casting choices in the world of American cinema. So I think you brought up women in this movie, which is interesting because we don't get women in the first third of this movie, really. And then we get Mercy, who is this really strong character. And she's sort of, Tad, you said it, there's this back and forth, this like verbal combat and combat of wills between Mercy and the Swan, the de facto leader of the Warriors. And it's this very much notes from the underground play, right? Where it's like, she says she's not a prostitute, but as far as they're concerned, she's a prostitute. She's quote unquote easy. And he has some really mean lines like, you ought to just have a mattress on your,
Strapped
strapped
to
to
your
your
back.
back. And we get this sort of understanding where she pushes back but isn't repelled from him, and you get this interesting dynamic where you feel like she's really looking for something that she perceives him to have, which is this sort of, you
He
know
seems worldly compared to her.
well, and it's this romantic in a way, but it's like this romanticized knighthood, right? This he's, he's not Ajax, who wanted to essentially rape her when they first got her, and he's not one of the other guys who's just going to hit on it. He doesn't hit on her at all.
Trying to
And
press it, pretty much dump her at any opportunity he can.
Right. But at the same time, he also, like the rest of the gang, well, the one other person who she hangs around with in the gang before he's killed, is he also seeks to protect her when the opportunity arises. He doesn't go out of his way, yet nor does he ignore her safety or whatever. He's like, go, you go, do this, whatever. And so it grows, and it's sort of this, his wall is taken down by her honesty, right? Because she doesn't say like, I don't sleep with people. That's not what she says at all. She's like, I only have this much life. Like, everything is terrible. Like, it's just everything is implied, like we've talked about a lot with this movie. It's everything is so terrible for these people that this is their life. And like when they get back to Coney Island, like, how could you, like, Coney Island to me is great because it's a slice of Americana, right? But at the same time, it's it's a dingy, dilapidated
They're rusted out
American
even back in the 70s.
beach town. Like, it's a tourist dump essentially. And so like, and Coney Island, we love you. This happy to have representatives from Coney
Go
Island, the
Whitefish.
Golden Classic podcast. But it's like they get there and Swan is like, this is what we came back, like this is what we're searching for, like it's just the blinders are off the eyes, right? Everything is put into perspective in that moment, that this was a microcosm that they live in, and all of this trouble is irrelevant, and all of their struggle is potentially meaningless, and yet they still pressed on, because what else are they supposed to do? So it's just a very interesting meditative stance for the movie to take, and a Swan as the leader who's sort of emotionless throughout the film. It's carried through because he is emotionless, right? He can be the one that continues forward and seems to have nothing get to him, but clearly that's not really true. So that was interesting, and I'm going to one thing we haven't mentioned here, because we're mentioning Mercy, but there are the Lizzies, which Mandy mentioned, which it is an all-female gang, which was nice to see. There's hints of maybe lesbianism or bisexuality there. It's really not relevant. It's really, they're very much a take on the sirens in Homer's Odyssey, right? Like they call to the men for them to go to their doom, and then we also get the other female character, which we haven't mentioned at all, which is the radio DJ. And the radio DJ is the black woman who is speaking over the radio to all the boppers, which is what she refers to the gang members as, giving them updates on where the warriors are and who's failed to stop them and so on, and playing music. And then there's a Joe Walsh collaborative that plays over the final scene. But we get the famous scene of her playing "Nowhere to Run To, Baby" as they're trying to make their initial escape from the assassination scene. And she's an interesting character, sort of I would imagine, and somebody can correct me on the timing of this, but a takeaway from the radio DJ in Vietnam, who's the female voice that everyone listens to on both sides, even though clearly a biased government agent. I think that it's a take on that. I don't know that there's a whole lot of, I'm not sure what parallels or what interesting dissection can be done. I'm sure there's some on that character and its interaction with the film. It's more well, she sort of plays the role of the muses in the Disney's Hercules film, right? Like they're essentially narrators at that point. She's summarizing the plot thus far to move on and giving us a hint of what's coming next. But also, it's this idea that there is this deep connection on the radio waves, which is a mainstream tool, right? Unless you're watching Pump Up the Volume with Christian Slater. And it's a mainstream tool that is being used and is essentially run by this underground gang culture that's presented in this movie, not the reality gang culture. But it's an interesting thing because that's so often true, right? We get all of our whatever is cool now came from somebody else that we in places of comfort and power have essentially been able to go, oh, I like that. I would like that to be mine now. And so it's just interesting, yet it's always got its roots back in the underground. So I thought that was interesting. We're going to wrap this one up before we move on to our next feature. I'm going to go to Greg. Greg, who would you recommend The Warriors to and why?
I mean, I think if you consider yourself any kind of film buff, that's who I would recommend it to. I think it's going to be 50-50 on if you're just kind of some random person off the street who says, hey, like recommend a movie. And I say, try The Warriors. You might like it, you might not. But I think if you're, people like us who have an appreciation for film, we've watched a lot of film, we tried stuff that we know we're going to hate just to kind of at least give it a taste. I think this movie's for you. It's got a lot to talk about. I think as we've shown, it's stylized enough that I think what it lacks in aging well is made up for. And again, yeah, it had more diversity than some films of the time, but it still had less than it should have. I think that's worth it, viewing for yourself.
Good points. Jeffrey Tucker. Jeff, would you recommend The Warriors? And if so, to who?
I think exclusively to film buffs. I think I enjoy this movie, and I enjoy it as like the art that it is. But I honestly think that it is almost hard for it to stand as a film now, just because of how unlikable this particular gang is. There's essentially a scene where one of the members is telling the others that, hey, I'm going to stop and take advantage of this woman. I'm going to force myself on her. They kind of are like, no, we got to get going. Like, they don't really care about the woman. They're just like, yo, we got like a place to be. But the thing that really like makes them very unlikable, like the next scene, they're like, shouldn't we go back and check on him? Like, I'm worried that he's like not okay. And that's just like, okay, these are very unlikable people. And the whole movie hinges on you caring that they get through the film. So like, just structurally as like a good, like, sit down and watch the film, I don't think it works. I think it is very good art and it's very beautiful. But just as like structurally as a film, it just
I think you mean
work.
as like an entertainment film, it has its
Yes.
problems.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to note that, because spoiler alert, he's not okay. And that is an interesting scene because it's very odd, because of course he's terrible because he's essentially going to rape this woman if she's not willing to have sex with him. At the same time, she is an undercover cop and he's arrested. But she also, I don't know what crime he'd be breaking, because she's soliciting him for sex essentially, which is an odd moment. But
he was arrested for being a gang member. Yeah, I don't know.
They are trying to get all gang members.
It's
but I mean,
some sort of weird.
She certainly didn't have
universe
to be. She certainly didn't have to try and get him to take his pants off for that to happen. But I think there's an argument to be made that in these I keep using the word microcosm because it's very appropriate here. This microcosm world of this gang, that different rules apply because they have simply, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it's clearly wrong, but I think of our military. And like, look at Casualties of War, the Brian De Palma film with Michael J. Fox and I think Sean Penn, right? Like, the things that team is portrayed doing in Vietnam are vile. Yet those are our troops, but it's vile. And of course, they're vilified in the movie, which anybody doing that should be. But it is a case where it's a whole bunch of elements mixed together that make you question what is right, because you are, by sheer virtue of our understanding of plot, and our desire to see plots wrap up. You're watching this movie and like, these are our heroes. I'm following them. Oh no, they're gonna. Oh no, so and so got killed. Oh, so and so got picked up by the cops. And you're trying to see like, are they gonna make it? Are they gonna make it? And then it forces you to look and be like, I don't. These are not necessarily good people. And so it's this. It makes you uncomfortable. And I think in that way, you're right. If you're just watching a movie for fun, it might make you think in ways that you don't want to think about. And I think that is a good definition of what makes it very worthy artistically, because it does cause that.
Well said. Yeah, exactly.
Do you recommend The Warriors? And if so, why?
I absolutely do. I think this is one of those films in American history and in American film history. I don't say it's required watching, but it's gotten to the point where it's no longer, I agree with you, it's not a cult classic anymore. This is kind of just squeezing its way into the regular classics because it has inspired so much at this point. I mean, only a few years later we had the Matt Dillon duology with like Rumblefish and The Outsiders, which took inspiration. I mean, they had their own source materials, but film wise they took inspiration. The Joker from 2018 has this similar feel and similar thought-provoking. Here's your protagonist, not a good person. Your protagonist is not the same as a hero. They're not good people. You are watching a movie about people who are probably pretty bad. I mean, if you're in a street gang, chances are you're doing some sketchy shit. That's just the reality. And this is one of those movies where it makes me kind of wish that you could actually go to a city and actually have some empty spots. But for you go to a city, typically it's like, where is this empty street? There is almost 24 hours a day. There's almost always a bunch of people walking around. There's no way you're going to get a nice, quiet, empty street to just have a nice.
No wonder there are so many gang members. Everyone is a gang member, and there are no people in this world. That is certainly true.
Yeah, it's also one of those funny things. The premise itself is a little flimsy. The premise is there are like 100,000 street gangers out there. They outnumber the police. Yeah, but there's a city of millions of people, and a lot of them probably have home arms and all that, where these guys are swinging around baseball bats. I'm not sure that whole like, oh, we own the city. No, you fucking don't. No, sorry, that's gonna end poorly for you. But I digress. I recommend this movie. I also recommend the other two, just as a like, if you want something in a similar vein.
Rumblefish,
The Outsiders.
and the Outsiders.
Yeah, they're great. Like makes a great trilogy of just youth street gangs, that sort of feel.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. And when you mentioned sort of the believability issue, that's why I think they said it in a near future at the time, is try and get around that. And it's a weird thing because I feel like this film is often lumped in with Kubrick's Clockwork Orange, but based off the novel, starring, of course, Malcolm McDowell, who's a brilliant actor. I actually don't like that film. I know this is my
it's okay, Nate. I'm
controversial yet brave statement.
It's not that
and
great.
I love Kubrick. I love Kubrick very, very much. And I love Malcolm McDowell. But what's interesting is that to me, if I had to choose between these two movies, which I think are often lumped together, I would choose this one. And the idea is that this one still takes place in an area where we as mainstream people who live in the normal side, we live in the daylight, so to speak, can see the crossover. And it actually, by being more quote mainstream in its portrayal and its world building, it actually is more effective than something like A Clockwork Orange, which goes out of its way to be outre and like and also the stilted language that takes place with some of the made up words mixed with the 70s, jive talk, not racially implied, but I'm sure it is derived from that, but is more understandable and more effective than, say, Clockwork Orange's essentially gibberish output. And feel free to write in, yell at me.
To Jeff's point, Clockwork Orange also has entirely fucking unlikable people versus at least The Warriors. You can kind of find a couple people to enjoy.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
and
I
that's
mean,
again like Clockwork Orange would be in that same boat for me. It's really just like a movie buff film. Like it's uncomfortable and unpleasant in a lot of ways, and like you have to be enjoying it for the art,
well,
or
exactly.
not enjoying it for the art.
Well, exactly. Well, like A Clockwork Orange too is also visually very striking, and so it has its element. You can never fault Kubrick for visual panache, but that's a digression. Mandy, would you recommend The Warriors, and if so, why?
It would. Kind of movie buffs, people interested in movies for the same reasons the guys mentioned. But I do want to just touch on one point. Tad asked, like, why are all these streets so empty? Like, what's the deal? This is weird. Keep in mind that this was from 1979 at the beginning of the early 80s recession, where there was a huge spike in gasoline, like oil prices, due to some stuff happening in the Middle East. So that could be why they decided to take that artistic direction with like things like not having a lot of automobiles happening, having that more Mad Max feel to like the bus of skinheads.
Yeah, it was desolate for New York City.
Right, but like they were probably doing near future where like oil was too expensive for people to be using cars, perhaps.
And there was no zinc, so there wasn't enough zinc to go around to use their firearms.
Perhaps. Yeah, they also weren't allowed to take their guns to the big meeting, so
they're not allowed to pack heat.
They were not. But anyway, so that's it. But yeah, movie buffs, people interested in the history of cinema, people interested in how actual history is represented in cinema might enjoy this.
Sounds good. Well, that rounds it up with me. I would recommend this film across the board. I think people who are interested in, of course, film students should watch this movie because there are many things that are accomplished with a very small budget. Of course, the cinematography and things like a bus, those are not attainable by no budget productions, but everything else pretty much is. There's a lot of very intentional camera work. The zooms, the setup shots of buildings and locations, very intentional, and the vibe is strong throughout the film. It is sort of, Manny mentioned, we've talked about this with films like Cruise and stuff. It may be supposed to be in alternate near future in the 70s, but it feels like the 70s. And that's not to say I didn't find it dated, because it is like looking in a different world. And from a historical perspective, I think it's very gratifying to see. So I recommend it to everyone. The reason I recommend it not just to film buffs is I do think that the way that it's presented and the pacing will carry you along. I think you'll be interested. And I think it will promote you to think, especially with the end, which they make it to Coney Island, but it's sort of I'm not even going to say bittersweet, because the entire drive was the journey. And now that they're there, you're left only with emptiness. Right? We don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what's going to happen. There is nothing, right? They've been fighting for nothing, I think, is a strong takeaway, but themselves. And that's all they have, that little bit of life that Mercy talks about. So I think it's poignant. That's going to wrap up this section. We're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back with 2011's Moist Fury. We'll see if Greg's still here. We are back. We're going to talk about filmmaker, writer-director Chris Seaver's film Moist Fury from 2011. Okay, there's going to be very conflicting views of this film, and I think probably that's how Chris Seaver prefers it. But Chris Seaver has made a gajillion films. Probably the most well-known to date is Terror at Bloodfart Lake, and its sequel, The Revenge of Said Bloodfart Lake. There's also Filthy McNasty, the series, and Mulva, Zombie Ass Kicker, Sex Squatch, many, many films. But we're here to talk about his sort of love letter to girl gang movies. So let's just dive right into the plot here. The plot, this is a comedy. It is a comedy. It is ultra low budget. This is presented by Sub Rosa Studios, SRS. Releasing, which is a supporter of the pod, big fan of SRS. Thank you guys so much. They release, check them out, dirt cheap films. They release amazing things like lesser known kaiju films from Japan, all the way to these ultra no budget features, all the way to classic, hard to find, shot on video 90s video rental store stock. So check it out. It's run by Ron Bonk, also no budget filmmaker. So SRS, we love them. But this is Moist Fury. This film is about and guys, there's going to be some off-color language in this review simply because the film is so chocked full of it. Moist Fury is about the girl gang called the Crimson Queefs, who has the best bitch fighter named Dewback, who defeats Doomblade, one of the few male characters in this movie's girl gang. He puts on the fights, and so he gets tired of losing, so he has his girl gang, the Roast Beefs, kill Dewback. Well, the aged, he's not aged, he's like, I don't know, late 30s, excuse me, Deathbone. I can't keep a straight face for some of this because it makes me giggle. Deathbone runs afoul of this murder, and they steal his Toblerone bar. This is the Roast Beefs before they escape. Well, the Crimson Queefs think that Deathbone has killed their beloved Dewback. When he finally clears his name, he helps train them so they can take on the Roast Beefs. I don't know if I'm going to spoil the end here. I think we're just going to move on because things do not end as you would expect them to end. This film is full of simulated sex, and I'm using that in the most broad frame topic because there is nothing approaching sex in this movie. And I'm actually quite, I'm going to give Chris Seaver credit for this because for all of the ridiculousness and the off-color humor and misogyny that's intentionally humorous, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that because it's so ridiculous. There is no nudity in this film. There's really no nudity.
Surprising
And
for a Chris Seaver film.
Surprising
for a Chris Seaver.
And Chris Seaver's no stranger to that. So I think it's kind of fascinating, and I give him credit for having a girl game film where and an exploitation, no budget genre where there's really no nudity, but there's lots of simulated sex through several layers of clothes. Yeah. So you've got these characters.
Is the photo like the money shot photo? Is that also not real nudity? Because
there's a fake penis on display a couple of times.
Okay, that was also the fake penis in that photo.
No.
I had a little trouble. I was watching on my laptop, so
I'm pretty sure it's not a real penis.
Okay.
There's a couple of fake penises on display, which is becoming more and more common. I'm reviewed several movies this year that have had full frontal male nudity, both real and fake, and so I think it's fascinating that that's becoming more commonly acceptable. Certainly not in the mainstream, but in the underground, and good. I mean, it should be an equal opportunity nudity these days. But anyway, Doomblade is played by Billy Garbarina, and apologies, Billy, if I mispronounced your name. He's been in many features, including other Chris Seaver features, and also some non-Chris Seaver features that are probably much more mainstream. He plays Doomblade, which is sort of like, I'm trying to think, sort of like if Beau Bridges was pretending to be Frank Stallone, not even Sylvester Stallone, Frank Stallone after a second stroke. Like he's got his look up the side and he just talks like this the whole time, and it's great. I literally will laugh every time he's on screen. And because I hadn't seen the previous Chris Seaver films that have Deathbone, because he is in other features, I didn't know this character yet. And so I actually wasn't sure if he was supposed to be physically disabled because of how off the wall he was until we finally get to see him have conversations with people. And yeah, he's this, you wouldn't even call him an anti-hero because he's not even a hero in any way, shape, or form. He's just kind of a big, blundering, misogynistic, every protagonist man who really wants revenge for having his Toblerone stolen, and he doesn't care about anybody else.
And getting kicked in the balls, don't forget about that.
Oh, he gets kicked in the balls several times, yeah. And it's, I don't even, it's one of those movies that we're just gonna have to talk about individually because there's so much going on here. Now, if there's a couple of scenes that are so disgusting in this movie to me, even though they're all clearly fake, but the worst comes up early on, and I'm not a I'm not squeamish when it comes to like bodily exclusions or whatever. But when Doomblade, the male lead of the other gang, propositions Dewback, and she reaches in her pants and pulls out a wad of, I don't even know,
Yeast.
spidery white
I think it's
It
yeast.
does look like some
viscous.
yeast
It does.
discharge.
It looks like vaginal discharge from someone who has an infection, and she throws it on his crotch. That is by far the most repulsive lowbrow thing in this film, and Chris Seaver had the forethought to put it within the first 10 minutes. And I'm pretty sure that's hey, if you can sit through this, you're gonna have a good time with the rest of this movie, and if you can't, well, then you're probably on your friend Nate's podcast and you have to. So yeah, I that was the most insane. But let's go. Let's jump around here. Tad, what were you expecting from this movie, and what's your takeaway now that you've seen it?
I expected more than. So this is a movie that surprisingly it looked like it actually cost less than Thanksgiving.
Oh, sure,
Like,
absolutely.
Like Thanksgiving cost more than this movie.
Yes.
Now, keep in mind, I had seen other Chris Seaver films before because I was introduced to the Teen Ape series, like Teen Ape Goes to Camp. And when that's your introduction, this movie was actually pretty tame in comparison because I was sitting through this movie and going, this feels like a high school film combined with $300, some cocaine, and what was a half porno. Like a half porno, like didn't go full porno, didn't even go like softcore, just we wanted to make a porn, but nobody was willing to actually take their pants off. So we kind of just did this instead.
Like,
And
we want you to think this is going to become a porn.
Right.
But
Now,
it's never going to happen.
I've seen Chris Seaver films where a full-on fake dick is totally screwing a chick's chest. All right. Now, that set the stage for what what usually I expect from a Chris Seaver film. Now the acting was pretty bad, but at the same time it was tolerable enough because everyone played such a ridiculous character and did it well.
That's the thing.
That,
everyone's in on the joke in this movie.
yeah, it didn't bother me that much that everyone was bad at acting.
It found the acting to be very uniform.
Yeah.
Like they were was like a bar that was set. They were like, this is where we want to hit. Like,
and I'm gonna give a shout out to Jessie Ames, who also helped produce this movie. She plays Skin Tag, the lead crazy of the
redhead,
the roast beefs. Yes, because she is giving. We talked about this off the air. She's giving strong Natasha Lyonne vibes.
Yeah.
And also just not afraid to chew the scenery like down to the studs.
I was gonna say like a little Dana Carvey, Garth vibes as well. Like a little bit.
Absolutely. Like head pressed all the way forward, like a half mullet, full on. And yeah, okay, I get that. I'm for sure on that. Now, Jeff, what was your expectation for Moist Fury, and what's your take now that you've seen it?
Gosh, I don't know if I had any expectations going in. I don't know. Like, I guess when you send a movie and like there's kind of like some hints in the air that it's going to be a bad film. I guess maybe this is our first one. I just start with Shark Exorcist and I start like playing around with how does it compare there. This movie is like intelligible. It actually is like, it seems to be kind of like everybody's in on the joke, so it actually can be fun. So it's it's bad, but like bad in a way that's fun to watch. And so overall I enjoyed it. The humor is it actually, what the other movie that it kind of reminded me of, RuPaul's Star Booty a little bit, but like actually kind of like funny in parts. Like I feel like
that's such
this
a
film
read, but it's not untrue.
Yeah, it's like Star Booty I felt like it was trying for this kind of like self-aware, like everybody knows they're in like a scene and they're just like having a fun riffing. But maybe they didn't go far enough in Star Booty. Maybe it just wasn't ridiculous enough to be entertaining, because I wasn't super entertained by that film. But this one actually got me laughing a couple times.
Yeah, I'm gonna hazard to say that Tad, your mention of Thanksgiving is accurate. And also, can we just talk that there's mentioned that there's a lot of film quotes worked into this as actual dialogue, including Thanksgiving. They use the famous Thanksgiving Live with the same rhythm and everything of "nice tits, bitch." And if you think that Chris Seaver is not intentionally quoting that, you're kidding yourself. It is an absolute intentional reference to the 2-year-older Thanksgiving film, and there are many others more mainstream as well.
Like Star Wars, like they're like
Yes.
Revenge of the Sith of all things. Like they quoted Revenge of the Sith.
They did. Yeah, and I think, Jeff, you brought up Shark Exorcist, which is, and go listen to our Shark Exorcist. It's our very first episode. We paired it with Exorcist 3/Legion. We also interviewed Donald Farmer, great guy, super excited to have him on. Really enjoy his work. That said, Shark Exorcist is our bar here at Cult and Classic Podcast.
We said it early.
For the lowest watchable feature. And I believe Jeff actually had to watch it several times to try and make sense of it. And I don't know that
parts of it several times.
I don't know that you ever succeeded. But yeah, compared to that, this clearly actually had things written on pages. It actually had a script and there is a plot, and the plot at the end, instead of having, we're trolled so hard by this movie because instead of having a resolution at the end, everything essentially our lead character just leaves and the entire movie collapses around him, and that's the ending of this movie. And so the entire thing is a big joke, like not just the material in the movie, but the movie itself feels like a sort of a meme come to life, you know. Interesting stuff. Greg, what were you expecting?
Yeah, Nate.
What were you expecting?
This dude's queued up and ready.
What were you expecting of Moist Fury, and what did you get?
Yeah, you'll notice I haven't said a fucking word so far because I've been biding my time. Nate, we went to the same.
This, by the way, before Greg speaks, Chris Seaver, reach out to me. I would love to have you on the podcast.
Yes,
earnestly.
please.
We'd really like to talk shop. So that stands. Greg, what did you think of Moist Fury?
I didn't like a single fucking thing about it. I'll give it some credit. It was a film. There was a narrative that I could follow. It was cohesive. It had beats. It had acts. It had the structure there. But I'd like to bring up Poe's law of the internet, which is anything so extreme in its viewpoint or what it states, you cannot tell if it's meant to be parody or sincere. And I think that this skirts that line of, is it supposed to be tongue-in-cheek and they're in on the joke, or is the joke on them? Are they Sweet D?
Yeah, this is, I just want to, in full disclosure to the audience and listeners worldwide of Cult and Classic Podcast, Greg and I once worked on a musical script where in the opening scene has two brothers covered in feces while singing about adventure. So I did want to,
we know something about being covered in shit.
I did want to throw that out there. Yeah, no, because
well, here, let me say this. There were some moments that I thought were genuinely fucking hysterical, but the ride to get there, I wanted off. I wanted off really bad. Like one that I wanted to highlight that was near the end. I'm gonna call it the second sex scene of the film, in which Bonesaw, whatever the fuck his name was. He's having sex with the woman that Andromeda that he convinces, you know what, lesbianism is a phase, and you just need, I believe I quote, a deep dicking to cure that phase. But they have sex, and it's mildly funny, and I'm like, okay, I get it. Like they're doing weird positions, and yeah, haha. But then when it pans out at one point, and the pizza chef sensei is underneath them, like giving a thumbs up, and he's not in the sex. They're just having it on top of him, and he's almost there, like thumbs up, like I'm so happy to be here, but also you're both doing so good.
Listeners, Mandy is muted right now, but I seriously think she might die of lack of oxygen because she's laughing. And Jeff's face is as red as his beard. Here's the thing. And
that scene, I will like, you know what? I was like, hey, you took me out of my melancholy funk that I've been in this whole film, and I genuinely had fun for about 10 seconds.
And which is funny because the scene's about 6 minutes.
Yeah.
So here's the thing.
It's a long one.
I want to mention that the film is 1 hour and 7 minutes, give or take. And so I think it sits at the right length, because if it were longer, it would be too much for everyone, not just.
Well, if it was longer, I would have had to do my viewing in 5 parts instead of 4. So that really worked out.
So here's what cracks me up. So I had to. Speaking honestly about cult film, especially horror film, although this isn't really horror, but we do a lot of horror here at Cult and Classic Podcast and tons of low budget, no budget film. Being culturally aware of things like women's rights, LGBTQIA+ rights, BIPOC, people of color rights, and the struggles, all these things, every once in a while quite frequently actually, you come across a movie that earnestly does not understand why it's being hurtful to one or more of those groups, or worse, intentionally espouses beliefs that are hurtful to them, and purports it as being correct. And that dialogue that Deathbone gives, denouncing lesbianism as just a fad that everyone gets over once they've had the right, as you quote, deep dicking. Like, it's the moment where every time I see a movie like this, I have to stop and I have to take stock of everything around the movie to see if it's actually a joke that it's aware of, or if I have to be deeply disturbed and offended. Because and here's this is going to sound very stereotypical, but here goes. What sold me on that clearly, you cannot have a movie with this many women with tattoos and sleeves and not have them all be aware that at some point some non-traditional sexuality is real. So that was what told me that everything was a joke and allowed me to enjoy it. But
I will say, if this film was a high budget film, and I'm talking high, like millions and millions of dollars, I would have had serious issue with it, because
Right.
It was so low budget. I'm like, none of these women are getting career starts off of this. None of them are getting buku bucks to shut the fuck up and do the movie. So I have to imagine that they're all in on the joke and enjoying the joke.
They look like they're having fun. That's something
That too.
Actually,
Yeah.
Everyone in here looks like they're having fun, and it's kind of infectious. Like, Well,
here, I'll give you this is my big takeaway pushback is when someone explains an inside joke to you, and there's kind of that awkward moment of like, oh, it's like really funny, and you're like, I don't get it, I'm sorry, like it must have been one of those be there things. This is tangential, where you explain the inside joke to me and I get it. I get the inside joke. I see the punchlines. I just don't think it's funny. And so I'm just sitting here while you're like screaming into your own abdomen, and I'm just trying to get through the moment so that I can do something else.
Totally. That's the thing. To me, I did find there's a couple of, this movie is at its strongest when it set you up to believe that it has zero intellectual quantity, and then it actually has something like a wordplay joke. You know what I mean? Like, those are the moments when I genuinely laugh, because the level of discourse is so far under my shoe that when they give me something that's genuinely funny or well written, or a really great acting moment, like, no, don't hit me, don't whatever it is, don't hit me in the face with your elbow in my eye, like something so ridiculous that like I can't help but laugh. Like, it disarmed me to the point where my reaction is completely genuine and unpreventable, on my behalf.
Oh, I do want to highlight one moment of really solid acting. Deathbone and Doomblade, the bits where both of them are admiring each other's names in separate moments. That was perfect delivery. Yeah. Absolutely perfect. That's, and of course, I think Lactasia's or no, not who sorry, spoilers, who died at the very beginning?
Oh, Dewback.
Dewback, yes. Dewback's death and like all of her taunts to them. I did miss her throughout the film. I thought she was
a strong
really,
role, yeah.
really solid.
Yeah. So I will credit. Here's the thing. We're laughing. Greg is not wrong, guys. The fact that maybe 4 out of 5 of us really enjoyed this movie by Chris Seaver and Greg had a miserable time, it is not invalid. There is absolutely truth that this is a terrible movie. It's intentionally a terrible movie, but it's a terrible movie nonetheless. But the fact that it's made me laugh more than so many others because it's not just that it's extreme, because it's also sort of childlike and innocent in a bizarre way. Like the ideas and the way it's presented is so, we made this at home over spring break in high school, even though it's not in high school, right? That it's the kind of thing where, as Greg said, if you were in it and you guys all sat down at the wrap party to watch it, like you just made for fun, you would all die 24/7 and lose your mind. And then you would go to show it to other people who aren't in it. And there's a couple of people who'd be like, this is the greatest thing ever. Like, can we be in the sequel? Can we do this? And then most people would be like,
what the fuck is wrong with you?
This is terrible. Like, and trust me, I've made those movies. I've made plenty of those movies. In fact, here's a little story. So I made a film, several short films, and they were online at one time, and they will be online again, but they were online at one time. And this girl who I knew, who we were going to make some shorts with, and didn't happen, probably because of this moment, said, I watched your we were getting ready to work on a project together, and she said, I watched your short films. They were really bad. Why did you put them online? Like, that genuine question was just like, okay, you and I have nothing in common.
Wait, who the fuck was this?
I don't even remember her name. You did not. She.
It's disguising the gender. It was me, 100%.
Yeah, we can talk after this, Tad. But
Roger that.
but yeah, no, it's so, and it was such a genuine like question that like I was like, I wasn't offended because you were not wrong about any of what you just said, but the mere fact that you just brought that up to me offends me, because it shouldn't have had to be said. It should not have had to be said. We all know that, and that's where the self-awareness in this movie comes in, and the fact that I do think there's some funny moments. I mean, the fact that in the climactic battle, because Andromeda, who turns out to not be a lesbian, because she finally has had the sex of her life with Deathbone, whatever. They,
Taserface.
Right, Dewback was her lesbian lover, and so she's fighting against was it Doomblade and the roast beefs for revenge, but they don't know why Deathbone is fighting. Well, it's because they stole his Toblerone, which goes for like $7 now, as they say. And that's his entire purpose, is to fight and kill Deathbone or Doomblade. My bad. They're D names. Chris Seaver, you should have switched it up. Reviews are a nightmare with 2 D names. But yeah, it's all about the Toblerone. And the cast members react as though they're the audience, like as though the audience is supposed to act. I mean, we're not surprised because we've seen what character this is. Okay, at one point he has a fake dick in the bottom of a popcorn bucket, and says, I thought it was a pretty good idea. It was magic to me when they actually have the conversation, that like when he makes Deathbone makes all the other characters shut up so he can tell Doomblade that he's going to have his revenge because they took his Toblerone. Like, when he stops the entire movie to do this, it was kind of brilliant. And I also want to say the scene at the end, I won't really spoil this, but when he's running away at the end, this is the final scene in the movie. Billy's run as Deathbone is the most comical, most perfect moment of physical comedy. I've drawn that panel in comics so many times, and to actually see a real life person do that down the road, that was a bucket list moment that I can check off. And so I can't thank enough for that. I could have hated the movie and that wouldn't matter. But back to this. I'm so far off track because I'm reliving these moments. Who have I not asked yet? Have I asked anybody other than Greg? You guys asked Jeff and Greg, correct?
Me.
I asked you?
Yeah, I was first.
Oh, you were first? Jeff, did I ask you?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I guess that's
Do I
it
get a- do I get
anyway.
a second go.
Mandy, I see you. Put your hand down. Mandy.
I feel
Man-
like Hermione Granger right now. Like, follow me. Answer.
Mandy, what did
down,
you think
Hermione.
of this? What did you expect from this film? And what do you think of this film now that you've seen it?
Oh my god, I had no expectations other than that it was gonna be the weirder, crappier one because I'd already seen Warriors, and knew that was our classic. So no expectations. I hadn't seen anything from this director before, but it was what I needed this week, and I am apparently the target audience, like not Greg. So I enjoy. Like it took me a little while to get into it. I was like, oh, like this is gonna be like bad. Like the acting is horrible, the sets are horrible, the props are horrible, like everything's horrible. But then I'm like, oh wait, but it's all like not on purpose because like it's clearly what their budget kind of dictates, like the level that they're gonna be at. But they like were like, this is the level that we're gonna be at, and like we're gonna embrace it, and we're gonna like play with it. And it was almost like very close to breaking the fourth wall, but like they never did. But it's almost like you can tell that they're like we're in on it, and like we're telling you that we're in on it, but we're not like turning to the camera and telling you that at any time. I thought it was just so great. But I mean, like the bucket of popcorn that you mentioned, it is not like a movie theater bucket of popcorn. It is probably like a paint pail, like a paper paint container that you would get at the hardware store with popcorn written on it, like as a prop. Like high school theater, not even high school theater. Like I don't even know. Like
And that sounds like too much effort considering you can buy like a plastic tub of like the same thing for like $2.
Right. To go to a theater and get
The paper one.
yeah, you'd be like, could I just have like an extra one or whatever? We want to split. I don't know. Like make an excuse or not. Just be like, I just want the container. But yeah, they didn't even do that. They just wrote popcorn on the side of something like super cheesy. But I like, and then as Greg said, like, is that level intentional or not? Like, unclear. But like, I kind of feel like it was. I particularly loved all the shots of the ceiling, like that acoustic tile with all the water stains on it that like made you really believe that they were filming this in like the community college like classroom or something like that they all belong to. But yeah, it just all of it came together for me. I think my absolute favorite scene was when Doomblade eats the Trobolone because
Toblerone.
like,
Look,
yeah,
we're trying to get sponsors here, Mandy. Can you please say the product correctly?
they don't even say the product correctly. That's like a whole scene that they make up all these different ways to say it. But like he's eating it and like all the girls are just like jizzing themselves, like watching him eat this chocolate bar. And I
mean, to be fair, it is Toblerone.
Exactly.
No.
So and I was just like, that's epically genius. I love it.
That's Toblerone. Get it Toblerone.com/Colton Classic Podcast for 15% off your order of Toblerone. Yeah. No.
Because they're like $7 now.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, like I feel like it wouldn't have worked. It wouldn't have hit like the funny bone for the people that do find it funny if it had higher production value, as Greg pointed out. Like we would be very concerned if this movie was made by people that had more money and put more polish on it, because it's a turd and it's not meant to be polished.
I think that's fair. Like if Kevin Bacon were leaning over, I don't know, if you want to be less age appropriate than possible, like Jennifer Lawrence saying like, you just need a deep dicking. Like it's going to be a terrifying, radically horrendous, like it's going to be the Trump family's greatest film. Like it's just a monstrous abomination. But when you have Chris Seaver's Deathbone saying it, it's in this matter of a fact, out of the side of your mouth kind of way. Like, I don't know if Billy had to wipe drool off a lot of the way. Yeah, I'm calling you Billy. I hope that's okay, Billy, because I don't want to butcher your last name anymore. Yeah, I agree. I think that across the board, this is the kind of movie that no budget filmmakers would probably be really proud to put out, because there's a lot of stuff going for it in that, as ridiculous as completely tasteless as it does have a script. It The trolling of the audience seems to be intentional as opposed to accidental. It doesn't try and take itself more seriously than it's capable of. I want to mention too that there's like an explosion on the cover of the DVD and the poster. There are no explosions in this film. I don't even think there's a car in this film. And there's a car, except in the background when they're talking about this post-apocalyptic wasteland and a car drives by. That was pretty cool. Yeah, no, it's just everything. Chris Seaver understands the scope of his productions. He doesn't reach beyond what he can realistically attain in an easy-ish way. And I'm not saying it's easy to make a movie. It's incredibly hard, even a no budget feature. So in order to do that, actually, in actuality, you need to make sure you understand scope. We've seen cases where the scope is completely off and it's a god-awful film, and no one wants to watch it, not even the friends that were in it, most likely. And I don't think that's the case for this. So we've talked enough about the interestingness that is Moist Fury. I'm going to start with you, Jeff. Would you recommend Moist Fury? And if so, to who?
Yeah, so I guess suppose it's just the people who enjoy the irreverent, this is like a big fart joke, but I don't even know if there is a fart joke in this movie. I don't think there was.
They have simulated sex
just
on
like a
toilet,
lot of like
but
bodily function jokes. I don't know. I really enjoy this just type of comedy. This just kind of like gross, like stupid, like like I'm certain that they were self-aware, but maybe not. Maybe the scriptwriter actually believes that lesbians are fake. But
and that women throw giant wads of yeast goo at each other.
Yeah,
and here's the thing, guys. I'm not trying to say that men are less that penises are less disgusting than vaginas. This is not the case. I just think as mammals, we're vile. And the symbol of anything leaving our body and being put on camera is in turn vile. And it's intentionally vile in this case. I think Chris Seaver, that was his way of like giving 100 question essay prompt at the first day of class to see who doesn't show up next week, and weeding the herd. That was the herd thinning of Moist Fury. Yeah.
So yeah, overall, I think it's funny. A lot of people like Greg. So we actually did a comedy, which I think I was the only person that didn't like it. If you don't think it's funny, there's nothing else in this film. There's not a single thing that's going to get you through it. It's just if it's funny or not, if it makes you laugh or not, that's it. If it'll make you laugh, you'll like it, period. So watch the first 10 minutes and then choose to go on, I guess. So that's probably the right way to do it. And sorry, Greg, you had to watch the rest.
Fair point. Greg,
no.
Would you recommend?
No. Oh, sorry. No, finish the question.
Would you recommend Moist Fury and why?
Okay. No. And Jeff, I mean, you really hit that nail on the head. And I think that's the comedy pit is if you don't find it funny, you don't find it funny, and there's nothing else there. I guess as side recommendations, Kung Fury. I mean, that's another mid-budget. I don't remember what their Kickstarter hit, but that I think kind of left the stratosphere of being considered true low budget, but it is an indie film that's obviously a group of friends coming up with something crazy together. If you want something that's high budget, trying to offend you and skirting the line, consider the Postal film by
Bowl.
Yeah. A modern classic in making you just upset watching it. But that said, to Chris and the team, like This is a film that I have to applaud for being exactly what they wanted it to be. It doesn't mince words. It knows what it wanted. I just wasn't along for the ride, and yeah.
So I think that's totally fair. Mandy, would you recommend Moist Fury, and to who and why?
I guess if you like bodily humor and really dumb stuff that, or like almost like self-deprecating humor, because even though those aren't the kinds of jokes that are scripted, like the whole movie is making fun of the fact that it is a movie. So you might get down for that. I thought the costumes were really good, actually, like the sense of style and like what they made for choices. So like perhaps I don't
Yeah,
know.
the fact that in
You would
some
want to,
closet in one of the cast members or production people's closet
yeah.
is just a like a bunch of hanging um denim jackets and vests that have crimson queefs emblazoned on the
Mm-hmm.
back and like bedazzled jewels. Like that I want one.
Right.
Send it on over. Send
But I
it
think
over to
like one
Chris.
of the girls was wearing like nylons under chaps with like a thong or
Yes.
something. Like it was like
Yeah.
pretty unique choices that were made. That were kind of cool, like just a little bit different. It, I don't know, but yeah, you gotta like potty humor. Like it's like there's not even that many poop jokes. Just
Yeah, it's
like
just very
weird.
lowbrow here. Like
It's
they're not
very
afraid to be
lowbrow.
crass. Crass is a good
Yeah,
word for it,
crass.
right?
Yeah, crass. Yeah, you're not looking for something fancy. It'd be a fun one.
Tad,
Yeah.
would you recommend Moist Fury? And if so, to who?
I laughed my ass off watching this movie. I still would not recommend it. It's just it's a for me this is my best way of describing this movie is as if Chris Seaver tried to take a Russ Meyer film and then draw it entirely by hand in MS Paint. Like MS Paint memes have been a thing on the internet for a long time. This is the equivalent of that. This is taking a Russ Meyer film, the exploitative comedy of that, and reducing it to basically some scribbles in a GIF. It's but there's some comedic value to it. Like I enjoyed this more than I probably should have. Um, I still wouldn't recommend it. I don't know anybody except for one person that I can recommend this movie to. My wife came home as I was finishing the movie and she's like, "What the fuck are you watching?" I'm like, "Come over here. You have to see how terrible this is." And I showed her the first scene where Dubak throws the yeast at him, and she's like, "I'm out. I'm done." Um, and that's says everything that I think I need to say. But at the same time, the guy who plays the chef, I hope that he got a career somewhere along the line. I didn't look him up because I for a split second I thought it was my brother. Like I was
He
like,
looks very much like your brother. For listeners,
he
it's
acts
Trevor
like
Smith, by the way. Trevor Smith played the character Coach. And it is he's in Return to Blood Fart Lake from 2012 and Filthy McNasty 4 Carnal Holocaust.
now if yeah, it's probably been a while, Nate, since you've seen my brother, but he is still as the little tiniest manic Italian you've ever met. He speaks exactly like him. He waves his hand whenever he's talking when he's pissed off, which he's always pissed off, just like that. And I was like, oh my god, he's a fucking angry Guido, and the only thing that's missing is the fucking gold chain. It was spot on. So my brother needs to watch this, and I have a friend who I'm going to recommend this to, and she's female because honestly, if I were to recommend this to any of my friends, they would be my female friends because they would probably get the jokes even better than anyone else I know.
I,
But no, other than that, no.
I sort of feel like I feel like on some sort of surreal level that on a good day in the world that we live in, this is what it's like to be a woman, is just to walk around. Every man around you is both stupid and like sexually ignorant and trying to fumble into it. That's just the way that the world is. And everything else is just move along. Um, I I think I think I'm gonna recommend this movie to people if you like the thought of a movie that is crazy and low budget. Yeah, I mean we've talked about trauma films before. This is right up that alley. It's a no budget versus low budget, so it's down there. If you've seen other SRS movies sort of the 2000s releases. Give it a watch. You'll enjoy it. I'm going to say this. I've said this for other movies. This is a party movie for sure. If you're having a bunch of people over, put this movie on in the background. People will lose their mind, especially those who have never. Most people haven't encountered, even in the cult, most people have really encountered the temporary no budget film. People will lose their mind. Oh, can anybody hear me? Can you hear me now?
No, yeah.
So, as I said, tech troubles today, folks. But yeah, I'd recommend this film to anyone, especially for parties. People will lose their mind if this is a party because most people, even cult fans, have not witnessed true contemporary 2000s no budget cinema. And Chris Seaver's masters of that.
Like what? Like a Jonestown party? Like a Donner party? What kind of
Listen,
party?
Get your Kool-Aid, get your nutritional yeast.
A party that involves a retinue of the cheapest liquors that you can pick up from the packy.
Pop-Off and Captain Morgan.
There you go.
Yeah, this is
Just pop off.
Yeah, pretty much.
Or
This
Mad
is
Dog.
just a pop. This is a pop-off movie.
This is very much. This is the Pop-Off, not Mad Dog, because you don't want glass around the people.
Fair point.
Yeah, no, this is very much like a freshman year of college. Like you found this, and now you're gonna make everybody watch it, like Greg did for movies. That's how I saw Pokemon movie. Yeah, so this is the thing. Most people will not enjoy this film, but there's a great large subsection. I find this movie funny, and I do not find a larger budget film like Super Troopers funny. You know, so I know Mandy likes Super Troopers. Sorry about it. So give it a shot. So that's it for today's episode of Cult and Classic Podcast. To play us out, as always, is the Chud with All About Evil. I want to say thank you, of course, to our guests, but also to all of the people who make the movies that we discuss and sometimes rag on. If you like what we're doing, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Podcasts, especially, or anywhere you get your podcasts, because that helps other people find us. It is the lifeblood of the podcast community. So have at it and have a great day. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit cultandclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.